a major theme of today is like, can we start to think about conflict as a portal towards what we want? Not just like a hurdle, but like something that can actually quicken and take us there in a more deep and aligned way. So before we dive in, it feels important to sort of clarify what we mean by conflict, because there's a lot of confusion about this, right? And that sort of can amplify resolvable conflicts into like much bigger tangles. So when we say conflict, we mean run-of-the-mill disagreements and differences that could be around needs, values, strategies, resources, and of course, relationships to power. It can be personal, political, or structural. And almost always there's going to be power and privilege at play in every single conflict that you have. And that doesn't mean that it's like abuse per se. So abuse. What do we mean by abuse? Abuse is behaviors, whether they're physical, emotional, sexual, or other, intended to really control people, right? To maintain control and power over people. And that can be interpersonal or something as intense and extreme as sort of intergenerational structural violence, right? That many of us have experienced. It's important for us to differentiate between these two because the practices that we use for conflict are not going to work to resolve abuse and intergenerational structural harm, right? And vice versa. The practices that we use like for power building and, community accountability and transformative justice are a little bit overkill for conflict. And that's kind of part of the reason why Jovita and I created the tool that we did, the Turning Towards Each Other workbook, is because transformative justice practitioners were like, can you stop calling me for like just a regular argument? Can people not just learn how to deal with that on their own? We don't need a whole circle for that, right? And then to articulate one other distinction, which is harm. So harm can happen in both conflict and abuse. The harm in abuse is much more extreme than in conflict. Harm is just suffering, essentially, that needs support and healing, whether that's from practitioners or the earth or community. So we wanted to make those distinctions. Feel free to drop in the chat if that resonates, if you have alternates. And I also wanted to shout out, we took these definitions primarily from Adrienne Marie Brown's book, We Will Not Cancel Us, and also influenced by Mariam Kaba of Project Mia.
Oftentimes people think of conflict as a communications issue because that's when it tends to erupt and become visible, is in interpersonal exchanges. And typically, commonly, there are actually multiple layers of things going on in any given conflict, including equity, as we've named, power relationships. And we want to start actually with our relationship with ourselves, even how we're feeling about ourselves in any given moment, how we relate to our own needs, how we relate to caring for our own well-being. All of those things are sense of purpose. And, the grounding that WAM offered is one example of a practice that can help us be clear about our purpose even when we face tensions and conflict. And then the next layer is the quality of our relationships overall and how we care for our relationships with each other. And so things like actively expressing appreciation to each other and understanding, like, why are we here together? Those kinds of things, caring for both ourselves and our relationships with each other will help us navigate tensions and difference and interpersonal tangles when they do arise. And they will arise. It's part of being human. We all make mistakes. Our messiness is part of what makes us beautiful. So we just want to normalize that. All of that is to say we're today not focusing on communication specifically, but on the deeper parts of the conflict iceberg and particularly how they interrelate with questions of equity and power. Because doing that deeper work will help us navigate those tensions when they do erupt.